And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Tuesday, December 2nd, 2025. And the extent of the ice, it is really filled in here along the Beaufort and Chukchi Sea coastlines. We see some areas of concentration still below 80%, especially Point Hope to Kivalina and then down in the Bering Strait. But otherwise, this is filling in rather quickly, and we have some much colder temperatures on the way this weekend through next week and probably mid-month. So the ice will just continue to thicken and solidify and also expand southward as a result. We will also see some stronger winds developing offshore of the mainland, especially as this Arctic air builds and heads southwestward. So in the meantime, though, we have the stationary front responsible for the heavier snow, windy conditions. We've had blizzard conditions this Tuesday along the lower Yukon Delta, with winds gusting 40 to 60 miles an hour with moderate to heavy snow. Further south, there's been a little mix of precipitation. There could yet be another round as we go through tonight. And along this front, the snow that falls tonight will begin to diminish during the day, especially by Wednesday afternoon. The mechanism that's driving this band of snow and mixed precipitation along the front will begin to break down, as I said, on Wednesday afternoon and evening. We have a low situated late tonight, early Wednesday morning, just south of the eastern Aleutians, 980 millibars. By Wednesday afternoon, that low fills to 992. The occluded front out ahead of it bumps up along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle coastline. Meanwhile, this stationary front is ever so slowly sagging southward as the colder air winds out, and we have high pressure building over the northern mainland. And then for Thursday, high pressure begins to spill over into northwest Canada, helping to further push this front southward. We have kind of a conglomeration of weaker low pressures in the North Pacific south of the Gulf. Eventually, though, another piece of energy is going to come up out of the North Pacific. So by Friday, that will spread another front toward the Gulf Coast, and there's the potential for windy conditions and heavier snowfall along the northeastern Gulf Coast and northern Panhandle as we get into the weekend. That'll begin the pattern change to allow the really cold air to push northeast to southwest across the mainland. So on Wednesday, we have southeast to south winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet, inner channels, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage. Dixon Entrance looking at 10, 11-foot waves. Outer coast, kind of a mixed bag. South-southwest winds, Craig into Port Alexander. And then as we get up outside of Cross Sound, winds easterly 25 knots, also easterly 25 knots at Cape Suckling. On Thursday, look for south winds inner channel with waves 2 to 3 feet, winds just 10 knots. Outer coast winds will be westerly 10 to 15 knots with 8, 9-foot waves. Now across the northwestern Gulf, Cook Inlet on Wednesday, we'll see east winds 15 knots within Prince William Sound with 2 to 3-foot waves. Outside of Hinchinbrook entrance to Kayak Island, east-southeast winds 15 to 20 knots with waves up to 10 feet. Cook Inlet will see north winds 10 knots up toward Anchorage, Turnagain Arm, waves a couple of feet up that way. But as we get down past Anchor Point, north winds become more easterly toward Dixon Entrance with waves of 4 to 5 feet. Kennedy Entrance. And then along the Kenai coastline, Prince William Sound outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, Thursday, winds will be variable at 10 knots, so lighter winds then. And strongest winds, Cook Inlet will be off of Anchor Point down to Kennedy Entrance, northeast to 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. On Wednesday, Kodiak Island will see south winds 20 knots on the east side, turning easterly up towards Shelikof Strait and Bristol Bay. Coming down along the Alaska Peninsula, southeast to east winds increase 20 to 25 knots once you get to Cold Bay or False Pass. For Thursday, variable winds 10 knots within Shelikof Strait, kind of east-northeast winds 25 knots along the Pacific side of the peninsula, waves 7 to 9 feet, and then north to northeast winds around 20 to 25 knots out of Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay. Stronger gale force winds of 35 to 40 knots on Wednesday across the central Aleutians, especially from Atka and Adak westward through Kiska. And then on Thursday, winds continue northeast to north across the eastern Aleutians, 25 to 30 knots. As we get further west, there's a frontal system approaching the far western Aleutians. Could see 45-knot gales to low-end storm force winds of 50 knots from the southeast out toward Shemya and Adtu. And then for the west coast, Pribilovs up to St. Matthew will have gale force northeast winds on Wednesday of 35 to 40 knots, waves 15 to 17 feet. Look for east-northeast winds within Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays at 25 knots with 4-foot waves, and then ice along the lower Yukon coast. The snow will be letting up as we go through the later morning and afternoon. But northeast to north winds along the lower Yukon coast up to 35 knots. And then on Thursday, we develop offshore flow from the mainland. Northeast winds, 25 knots out of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, 15 to 20 knot northeast winds out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon coast. And you're going to see clearer skies to end out the weekend, but sub-zero temperatures and wind chills are on the way, and the winds will actually be strengthening offshore here as we go through the weekend. So it's going to be turning very cold across all of southwest Alaska here coming up later this weekend and for next week. Through the Bering Strait, strongest winds Wednesday will be along Wales off of Port Clarence to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, 35-knot north gales, waves 6 to as high as 9-10 feet over toward Gamble. Look for the lower Chukchi south of Point Hope, north winds 20-25 knots. Those winds flip around to the west. Once you get north of Point Leyte, Wainwright and Utqiagvik, and increase 20 to 25 knots from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. But as I showed you earlier, the ice is really filled in and it continues to build and thicken across the Arctic coast. And then on Thursday, winds are going to be a little bit more of a mixed bag. West winds 20 knots Kaktovik, southwest winds 10 knots Prudhoe Bay, southeast winds 5 knots at Utqiagvik. And then coming down along the lower Chukchi Sea, offshore winds will turn southeasterly out of Kotzebue Sound at 10 knots while turning back northeasterly off the mainland, Wales down through Norton Sound at 10 to 15 knots, extending out there to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, and waves generally running 1 to 3 feet off the western Seward Peninsula to the north side of St. Lawrence Island on Thursday.